Hey, what's going on, guys? It is your boy here, of course, the combat consultant, the soundboard god, Jacob Cooperman. And I wanted to make this video today because I've been giving a lot of thought to this subject in general. It's kind of been a dead period for combat sports news, particularly in the influencer scene, right? Regular combat sports, so much has been going on, but particularly in, let's just say, the misfits, the kingpin areas of the combat sports world, really not much has gone on. And this kind of got my mind going about where we would see this combat sports scene go in a number of years. Now, I've made a video similar to this before, but I kind of wanted to do an update just because I've given it a little bit more thought, and I kind of feel like I have some new insights that I want to bring to the table. First off, I talk about this a lot with friend of the channel, Unpoppable Balloons. Balloons, I know you're watching, my man. He seems to think that once KSI leaves Misfits, it will go under. And honestly, looking at the tape, I can't say as I disagree with him. Now, before we get into anything else, I think we should use 5 years as a good metric. I think where this scene will be in 5 years should demonstrate whether or not it can really be a mainstay in popular culture. So let's use that. And knowing the promotions we have on the scene now, Social Gloves, Creator Clash, Kingpin, Misfits, and what Jake Paul is doing outside of all of that, I think I could give a pretty good representation of where all of these different promotions and where the scene in general will be at that time. Now let's start off with Jake because he seems to be this single entity. It's no secret that Jake Paul is going into MMA at some point, so that has to factor into things. This may be a little bit of a hot take, but I could easily see Jake Paul working much more long-term with the PFL in MMA than boxing. I think that MMA is a sport that is on the rise at the moment. Not to say that boxing hasn't been making a comeback, but if you look at the guys that Jake Paul has fought, most of them have been MMA fighters. I also tend to think that long-term, it's a better play for Jake just because PFL has connections to ESPN, right? Their super fight series would probably be on ESPN pay-per-view. That makes sense if you're Jake, right? And you take a look at his boxing resume, it doesn't seem like there's that much for him left in the sport, if I'm going to be completely honest. Like, he's not going to be a champion in boxing. I don't think that's ever going to be the case. I don't think he's ever going to fight someone like a Canelo, like a Dimitri Bivol, like any of those guys at that level. Now, I'm not saying he has to, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing that he hasn't, but I also think if you're the businessman to the caliber of a Jake Paul, you're going to realize that people are going to lose interest after a while, right? He's going to start to run out, in my personal opinion, of real dangerous opponents to face at the level that he's facing them at now. MMA presents a new, interesting challenge, a little bit more money. PFL pays their guys very, very well. And with that new challenge brings renewed crowd interest, something that's very important for Jake and something that as a YouTuber, I'm sure he understands very well. Let's not discount that. Sure, I think Jake's gonna take some boxing fights every once in a while, but in 5 years' time, I see him having much more of a mixed and diverse resume across two sports and probably also getting much more involved in WWE. Because that just makes sense, man, right? Like, he's much more of an entertainer than he is a fighter. And I think if he were to go that direction, it would make complete and utter sense. At least that's what I would do if I was in his position. Now let's move on to the next logical option, which is Misfits, which is KSI. Now, KSI wants to fight Jake. No secret about that. It's what could be the best possible outcome for him in all of his endeavors, right? Growing Misfits, boxing himself. He wants to get to Jake, and he's been on the record as saying that before. I do believe, though, that once he fights Jake, retirement will most likely be a factor for him. And I guess we can kind of tie him in with Misfits here. I think in 5 years' time, he's fought Jake. Now, whether he wins or loses, that's not up for me to decide yet. I'd have to give a closer look into the fight. But the point is, he's fought Jake already in 5 years. I think Misfits will have grown to a certain point where influencers are boxing competently. They're putting on great contests, and it's kind of a great secondary option to regular boxing. I think by this point, too, regular boxing with all the stars that are kind of emerging in that scene now will have made a sort of comeback. Again, not to the level of an MMA, but something to rival MMA every once in a while with a big card. And I want to be very careful when I state this. I don't think it will grow in terms of its size or its platform a crazy amount, but I think just the quality of the fights that we will see as fans, just as more guys pile into the sport, more women pile into the sport, the quality of the product will increase, as well as the size of the viewership and the platform just a tiny bit. But I do want to stress the fact, I don't think we're going to be seeing Misfits on ABC. We're not going to be seeing Misfits on ESPN. It might be a very similar thing to bare knuckle boxing where they just have a large online following. Obviously, DAZN helps with that, but I can't see them getting above a platform of about 500,000. That being said, it will still be a very viable option for the everyday combat sports fan, perhaps if there's no UFC on that weekend or if boxing isn't dropping any heat. I think KSI after the Jake fight would probably retire and downgrade himself to much more administrative duties with Misfits, as I don't think it could go away completely unless KSI was to pull away from it entirely. All right, let's move on to some of these secondary and tertiary promotions. I think Social Gloves, I think Creator Clash will probably have pretty short lifespans. Kingpin out of those three is realistically the only promotion that I could see having any real long-term value, as that tournament style that they bring in is very interesting, and I think if they did one every single year, that could be a really nice fold the way it is now to a Misfits. And they have some really skilled influencers in there, so I don't want to take anything away from them, man. I think that they could be a major player in the scene and probably be to the level of, or just under the level of, a Misfits. In the same way that Misfits might give the UFC a little bit of competition every once in a while, again, when there's a weak UFC card on, I think that Kingpin, what we've seen from it now is that if Misfits messes up, Kingpin will be there to deliver fun and interesting fights. Now, I will say, the quarterfinals were not as entertaining, and the quality of the fights were not up to the level that I would have liked, but I do think this won't be a long-term problem, just considering the level of the fights we did see and the people moving forward that will be in the semifinals. I think that was kind of just an anomaly. And obviously, again, as the scene grows and more influencers have more training under the belts and we see new faces, new names within the scene, I think the quality and the interest level from fans will start to rapidly increase. Overall, I hope influencer MMA has a place in the scene because I'm a big MMA guy and I love boxing as well, but seeing influencers compete in that realm would be very, very interesting to me. It'd probably look sloppy, but hey, influencer boxing, when it first started out in that garage with Theo and Joe Weller, was pretty sloppy, and look where it is now. That, of course, is the metric I'm using to determine all of this. I think if they keep going in the trajectory that they're set on now, they should have a pretty fruitful future. Nothing too crazy, but something that KSI, that Jake, that Joe Weller, that Logan Paul can all be happy they helped invent. Without further ado, guys, that's been the episode for this week. Thank you so much, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Deuces.